Welcome back to the channel. I've been having a lot of fun with these stories lately, and I really hope you're enjoying them as much as I am. Each episode here is one complete tale, fantasy, woven into history, followed by the soft, soothing crackle of a fire to help you wind down. Now, I've been wondering, do you prefer having longer, single stories like tonight's? Or would you rather I include 2 or 3 shorter ones in an episode? I genuinely want to know. So please let me know in the comments. I read them all, and your input really shapes how this channel grows. Tonight's story takes us to London in the year 1666. Yes, the year of the Great Fire. You've probably heard the familiar tale. A small spark in a bakery on Pudding Lane, flames spreading through wooden houses, chaos and destruction that leveled much of the city. But what if that was only the surface story? What if the fire wasn't the disaster at all, but the cover-up? This story is called The Hidden Battle Beneath the Great Fire of London. It begins not with fire, but with whispers beneath the city. For under London's streets lay catacombs and hidden chambers older than the Romans. Deep within, sealed by runes etched in languages long forgotten, rested a gate, a doorway, not to another place, but to something worse. A prison for entities that were never meant to walk the earth. By 1666, the seal was failing. Centuries of coal smoke, water erosion, and human greed had worn down the wards, and the creatures waiting on the other side had been patient. They had tasted the edges of the city before, when plague stalked the streets. They fed on fear, on panic, on death, and they wanted more. Enter the Brotherhood of Ash, a secretive order of mages who had existed in the shadows of London since Saxon times. To the outside world, there were physicians, clerks, even a few members of the city watch. But when signs appeared, rats skittering from cracks, glowing faintly red, soot rising where there was no fire, they knew the gate was weakening. One of them, a young mage named Elias, had the gift of seeing through flame. He could watch sparks drift and tell if they were natural or tainted by something darker. And when Elias passed through Pudding Lane, days before the fire, he saw what no one else could. Fire bleeding upward from beneath the ground, trying to claw its way free. The Brotherhood gathered. Some argued the gate must be sealed quietly, with ritual alone. Others, more grim, believed fire itself was the only weapon strong enough to destroy the passage and all who tried to force it open. And so a plan was laid. On the morning of September 2nd, while the city bustled unaware, members of the Brotherhood prepared their spells below ground. Above, their accomplices arranged a distraction, a blaze that could consume homes, spread fast enough to drive people away, yet be blamed on accident. The bakery at Thomas Farriner's shop was chosen. The ovens had long been pushed too hot, wood stacked too high. A single spark, guided by Elias's whispered enchantments, would ignite it. But below, far below, another spark was prepared. For when the ovens burst into flame, so too would the wards beneath the city crack, unleashing what lay waiting. And that was the true beginning of the Great Fire. Down in the tunnels, Elias stood with his master, Magister Grey, and half a dozen others. They carried staves etched with runes, small lanterns of blue witchlight, and scrolls of sealing written on parchment made from calfskin. Their breath steamed in the cold, though heat pulsed from below, a heartbeat of fire pressing against the thin stone. The gate was waking, and when the first stone split, when molten cracks raced across the ground like veins, The things that had waited for centuries began to crawl free. They were not demons in the traditional sense, no horns or wings. They were shadows given weight, bodies formed of smoke and cinder, with eyes like burning coals. When they moved, the air itself bent toward them, hungry for breath, for life. The Brotherhood met them with fire. Grey slammed his staff into the ground, runes bursting in circles of gold light. Elias spoke words that turned sparks into spears. Others unfurled scrolls that shone with sealing glyphs. But the creatures were many, and the tunnel small. The clash echoed like thunder, unseen by the city above, even as flames now licked rooftops on Pudding Lane. What Londoners saw as fire spreading was, in truth, the reflection of battle. Every time a mage burned one of the creatures back into ash, a house above would catch flame, windows bursting from heat. Every time one of the shadows slipped through the wards, another street lit with fury. The city thought it burned. In truth, it bled. And Elias, in the heart of it, knew their battle would decide whether the fire ended in days or consumed everything. The tunnel screamed with heat. Stone walls cracked, flakes of mortar hissing into steam. Elias's eyes watered as he raised his staff, its tip glowing white-hot, barely containing the spell woven into its iron. "Hold the line!" Magister Grey barked, his voice hoarse from smoke. "Do not let them pass the seal!" The creatures surged again. They poured like living soot, limbs coiling into claws, jaws opening wide enough to unhinge. When they lunged, their bodies flickered, half in this world, half in the next. Elias struck one mid-leap, his staff channeling a torrent of fire so bright it blinded him. The shadow shrieked, dissolving into smoke, but three more pressed forward to take its place. Above them, Londoners screamed as fire leapt from building to building. Elias felt the heat shift with every victory and every loss below ground. When the Brotherhood faltered, the flames above guttered and changed course, seeking new streets. When they struck true, bursts of fire shot skyward, bursting windows in taverns and homes. The city was their battleground shadow. Elias staggered back, his boots slipping in water, running from ruptured pipes. He caught his breath, chest heaving. That's when he saw it. A crack opening wider at the far wall, light spilling out like molten gold. From it emerged something larger than the others. It was tall as two men, its shape vaguely human, but its torso was a furnace, ribs glowing white-hot. Every breath it took sending sparks into the air. Its eyes were pits of molten iron, and its voice was the grinding of stone. "The gate will open," it rumbled, each word shaking dust from the ceiling, "and London will burn for centuries." The Brotherhood wavered. Fear was a poison in their ranks. One mage dropped his scroll. Another staff sputtered. Magister Grey planted himself firm, hands trembling as he raised the seal rune, but his strength faltered, his years catching up with him. Elias stepped forward. His heart hammered, not with courage but with dread. He remembered, unbidden, a vision he'd had weeks before. Fire spreading across maps, not just London, but the whole of England, ash falling like snow. He dismissed it as a nightmare, but now he understood. This was not about one city. If the gate opened, it would not close. The furnace creature advanced, its footsteps cracking the floor. Shadows followed in its wake, dozens at least. "Elias!" Grey shouted. "The seal! Hold it with me!" Elias raised his staff. Together, master and student traced glowing sigils in the air, a shimmering lattice of light forming between them and the gate. For a moment, it held. The furnace creature slammed against it, sparks flying. Elias gritted his teeth as the barrier shuddered under the blow. His arms ached, his skin blistered, but worse than the heat was the sound above. A deep, endless roar, the firestorm. Entire streets were catching flame now, walls caving, roofs collapsing. He could hear the muffled thunder of churches crumbling, bells falling molten from towers. And still below, the battle raged. Behind him, one of the younger mages cried out. A shadow had slipped through, wrapping itself around her throat, like smoke given teeth. She fell, choking. Another mage tore it free with fire, but too late, her body crumpled. Elias felt bile rise. They were losing ground. Magister Grey's voice dropped low. Elias, there is one way, but it will demand everything. Elias knew what he meant. The Brotherhood's last resort, the binding flame. To invoke it, one mage must pour their life into the fire, sealing the gate with their soul as the key. It was forbidden, a spell of sacrifice. Grey was ready to speak the words, but Elias stopped him. No, he said, his voice raw but firm. It has to be me. Grey's eyes widened. You are not ready. Then it ends here, Elias replied. He thought of London above, the children fleeing through smoke, the mothers clutching what little they could carry, the cries of men dragging water buckets into streets already lost to fire. If he faltered, all of that suffering would be nothing compared to what was coming. The furnace creature roared again, slamming into the seal. Cracks spread across their lattice of light. Elias raised his staff higher, sparks spiraling upward like a column of stars. His veins burned with fire, and in that moment, he knew what he had to do. Elias pressed the staff into the ground, and the cavern trembled. Heat roared through him, a tide of fire too vast for one body to contain. The lattice of light flickered, then blazed anew, as if answering his heartbeat. Sigils wrapped around his arms, searing patterns into his skin, marks of sacrifice that would never fade. The furnace creature paused, tilting its molten head. Its voice rumbled like coal, collapsing in a mine. You would burn yourself for them? For a city already ash? Elias's teeth clenched. He could feel the edges of his soul fraying, fire eating at thought and flesh alike. Not for them, he rasped, for all of us. With that, he invoked the binding flame. The air ignited, not just fire, but fire older than cities, older than men, pure, searing essence of the first spark. It burst from Elias's chest in a torrent, a storm that whipped through the cavern, incinerating shadows in a heartbeat. The furnace creature bellowed, staggering as the binding fire wrapped its limbs, shackling it to the gate it had sought to break open. Above, the firestorm surged. The streets of London howled with flame, as though the city itself were screaming. Witnesses would later speak of unnatural winds, of fire-leaping rivers, of skies so bright it seemed day had returned at midnight. None knew that it was the echo of Elias's sacrifice below ground. The Brotherhood staggered back, shielding their faces as the cavern became white with fire. Magister Grey wept silently, unable to stop him, unable to share the burden. All he could do was watch as his student, his son in all but blood, poured his life into the gate. The furnace creature roared defiance, but it was dragged backward, shackled limb by limb. The gate began to close, golden light narrowing to a slit, then to a spark. The creature's voice faded into a growl, then a whisper. This city will still burn. And then it was gone. The gate sealed with a final thunderclap, stone and flame fusing into one. Elias stood for a moment, impossibly radiant, his eyes twin suns. He looked at Grey, managed a faint smile, and then collapsed into ash that scattered on the still burning air. Silence followed. The Brotherhood fell to their knees. Above, the great fire raged on, destroying half the city, but it was fire, and fire could be fought. The truth of what nearly broke through would never be told. Later survivors would argue endlessly about the fire's cause. Some blamed careless bakers. Others muttered about foreign spies, or even God's wrath. No one spoke of Elias. No one spoke of the gate. But in the vaults beneath Pudding Lane, sealed behind ash and stone, the sigils of his sacrifice glowed faintly, still holding. Grey staggered forward, the heat blistering his hands as he reached for the ashes that were all that remained of Elias. They slid through his fingers, glowing faintly like embers that refused to die. He pressed them to his chest, as though he could force them back into life. But the cavern only gave him silence. The Brotherhood gathered in a broken circle. Some wept openly, others stood hollow-eyed, their minds too stunned to grasp what they had witnessed. Together, they lifted their staffs and pressed their power into the stone, sealing over the chamber where the gate had once pulsed. The earth closed like a scar. When they emerged into the streets, London was chaos. Flames devoured homes and churches alike. Desperate citizens ran with buckets, and soldiers tried to form fire breaks in vain. The Brotherhood moved unseen, cloaked by charms of anonymity. No one noticed them, and that was how it had to remain. Grey walked among the survivors, like a ghost. He heard mutters about careless bakers, about sparks from ovens. Rumours spread quickly, needing no help. The truth, the true horror that had almost consumed the world, would never reach their ears. Better they blame smoke and negligence than glimpse the abyss. In the months that followed, the Brotherhood swore oaths in Elias's name. His sacrifice was too great, too raw, to let the world speak of it freely. They built wards beneath the rebuilt Pudding Lane, carving Elias's sigils into stone so the gate would remain bound. But they also erased his name from every record. If history remembered him, enemies might too. Grey resisted. He wanted Elias sung in every hall, honoured as the saviour of London. But he understood. Legends are weapons, and sometimes the sharpest blade is silence. So he carried the memory alone. Years later, when fires crackled in hearths, Grey sometimes thought he heard Elias's voice in the flames, a whisper, a laugh, or a simple word, teacher. And when the wind howled through the city, he wondered if it was Elias, watching, guarding, unseen. London rebuilt itself, brick by brick. The great fire passed into memory, then into story, then into history, stripped of its true war beneath. And Elias became a shadow, a name erased, a hero forgotten. Yet in secret halls, the Brotherhood still spoke of him, not as a boy or a soldier, but as the one who bound flame with soul, the guardian who burned, so the world might endure. And they prayed his ashes still glowed, somewhere deep below the city, keeping the darkness sealed.